On this Friday installment of Locked On Texans, Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610 stops by to discuss the first three games of the Houston Texans season and how can they bounce back and keep the Jacksonville Jaguars winless on Sunday.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Man, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers to this Friday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We made it to the end of the week. This is the perfect time to celebrate in advance because we believe the Houston Texans will walk away Sunday in the NRG Stadium with a victory. I'm your Texans football analyst, John, some sports guy. Hickman looking sleepy, looking tired, but we're still bringing you Texans talk because on the other side, all the way up on the East Coast, Detroit still hold it down for the South.
Yes, sir.
Cody Davis. If this is your first time watching or listening to the Locked On Texans podcast, please subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. And thank you to all of our everydayers coming back to listen to Cody and myself talk Texans. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $250 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Cody, take us away.
Yes, sir. And on this Friday installment of Locked On Texans, we will be joined by our guy, Mr. Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610, as he discusses and break down the first three games of the 2024 season for the Houston Texans and how can they bounce back against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And John, I do believe that the Texans will definitely bounce back against Jacksonville on Sunday. You will be inside NRG Stadium, I must say, so please be sure to follow John for all of your in-game updates. But I am a little concerned. Why am I concerned? Because we are only 4 games into the season, and as of right now, the injury bug is really starting to hamper the Houston Texans. Because yesterday at practice for the second consecutive day, Tank Dell, Joe Mixon, and Dameon Pierce, all three of those guys did not participate in practice. I understand we have one more day, which is today. However, you guys already know what I like to say. If you're not on that practice field by Thursday, 9 times out of 10, you would not be suiting up for Sunday's game. And I think the Houston Texans will definitely be even more short-handed because I'm not expecting Tank Dell to suit up on Sunday. And you also got to take into consideration that Nico Collins was limited in practice with a hamstring injury. You know, everybody who's been rocking with this show already know what I like to say. I said it last week when you look at Dameon Pierce. If you're dealing with a hamstring injury, whether you play through it or not, you got to be very, very careful because the smallest tweak can be the difference in between you missing one game or missing several weeks. And when you take a look at Nico Collins, who is by far a top 3 player on this team, I do not want to see anything, tragic sort of say in terms of an injury happen like that with Nico Collins, but hopefully he's able to suit up. But John, if you take a look at the Houston Texans, we already saw how this run game looked without Joe Mixon, without Dameon Pierce, and it looked bad. However, you still got to give some critiques to that offensive line, but at the end of the day, it didn't look like how it did during week 1. How can you and how do you see the Houston Texans bouncing back if they go into this game without Tank Dell, Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce, and even if he plays a Nico Collins who is not 100%?
Lon John Mechie up there running back. No, I'm just playing. The good thing about having John Mechie is in times like
he's healthy,
right? And so he'll be able to go out there and run the football. Be able to catch passes from franchise quarterback C.J. Stroud. That's a good thing. That's a blessing. In terms of getting the running game going, I'm not 100% sure. And honestly, this is one of those moments where I don't have a solution. Right? Cam Akers is there, right? So we know that if there's no Dameon Pierce, and even if there was Dameon Pierce, I would say that at this point you go with Cam Akers first as your RB1 with no Joe Mixon, simply because Dameon hasn't been able to play for the last 2 games. And so you go with Cam. It would have been Dameon Pierce, but he's not there. So it's like, okay, well, who do you go to? Who can you run to when you need runs? So for the Texans,
that's
British
not
Brooks,
a joke, by the way.
British Brooks is an option for Houston, but I don't know. I don't want to pretend that I know. I don't want to come up with something to say, man, I think they should do this and do this. I don't know, because Houston is in this offense from Bobby Slowick, excuse me. We know how much he wants to establish the run. This team has preached that from day one, once DeMeco Ryans took over. And so we saw how dominant the Houston Texans can look offensively, at least, when they're able to establish the run. 2 games after the first game of the year, hadn't been able to do that. Joe Mixon was only available for the Chicago Bears game, not against the Minnesota Vikings. No Dameon Pierce in a couple of weeks. So the formula for success for the Houston Texans hasn't been there for the most part. The only thing I can say right now is lean on CJ. Lean on him. That's it, because Cam, I think, will be able to give Houston some good runs in the run game. Yeah, of course, the guys up front got to be able to block better. DeMeco Ryans talked about how they've cleaned up those penalties and, got the offensive line back going. So that's a good thing to hear. But those guys got to be able to help establish the run. No doubt about it. I just don't know if Cam Akers is enough. And whenever he's not enough, I don't know if British Brooks is enough of a solution to relieve him. And so the good thing about it is CJ is there. Dalton Schultz is there. There's still weapons out there that should be good enough to beat a terrible Jags team.
I see where you're coming from. Of course, I have more faith in the wide receiving core because, look, even though, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have Tank Dell, and Nico Collins is coming to this game a little bit banged up with a hamstring injury. First and foremost, you still got Stephon Diggs. But to be honest with you, John, and maybe I'm looking at this from a selfish reason because, this is something I've been wanting to see over the last 3 years. John Mechie is finally going to have a genuine opportunity to go out there and make a name for himself. And I say a genuine opportunity because, 1, he's going to come into the game healthy. 2, I hate to say this, but there's not too much film on him. So it's not like you're going to have an opportunity to actually put together a game plan to kind of contain him. And of course, if John Mechie is out there lining up, you also got to take into consideration that a lot more attention will probably go to Stephon Diggs. But I just look at it from a standpoint, it's going to give, even if it's not John Mechie, you also look at somebody like an Xavier Hutchinson, someone who looked damn good in training camp, damn good in preseason. It's going to give both of those guys an opportunity to go out there on the field and actually have, I don't want to say a breakout game, but to finally have an opportunity to go out there and showcase what they can do. And I think with the wide receiving core, it's still going to be good. However, with the rushing attack, man, the only hope I have, I go back to late first quarter, early to mid second quarter, where it seemed like the Texans were starting to get something with their rushing attack with Cam Akers. However, don't know if it was due to the deficiencies that we saw with the offensive line, or was it just due to Bobby Slowick not fully trusting the guys that he had back there. I think there was a slim chance the Houston Texans, I'm not going to go as far as to say establishing a run, but I would say this. I think it will be enough to keep them afloat against the Jacksonville Jaguars for this upcoming game. That's where I'm looking at.
Shout out to Hutchinson too, man. I think he's going to get more reps and opportunities. He's been the active one for Houston through the first 3 weeks of the season. And I'm going to just say, I'm assuming 4 weeks as we get to Sunday. So there's something about Hutch that the coaching staff offensively, the offensive coaching staff likes. So with no Tank Dell, he's going to bump up in more opportunities. But I really think if I could point out to anybody having a bigger role, it should be Dalton Schultz, right? I mean, you just paid him, what is he making, $11 million this year?
Yeah.
Signed him to an extension. So, he hasn't been used through 3 weeks. Now, there's no excuse. So he should be a part of the game plan.
Definitely.
I think Sunday's going to tell us a lot about the future of this team. Honestly, I really do. But we got Brandon K. Scott on the other side of the break. You're not going to want to go anywhere. We got more Locked On Texans talk. It's time to get in on the action with PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the fastest and easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers, baby. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. Sit back and watch the winnings roll in. I tell you what, if you want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' biggest members like Drewski, Joe Budden, you can now find community plays under the promo tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineup stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half, your picks are still alive with PrizePicks. Download PrizePicks, the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 off instantly, or get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKED NFL, to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Friday installment of Locked On Texans. You already know who we got back in the building, Mr. Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610. Brandon, what's going on, man?
Man, I'm living good, man. I'm just hoping that these Texans can bounce back from that god-awful, pitiful performance that they had last week against the Minnesota Vikings. But overall, man, the Texans are still good. The Astros just clinched another AOS title.
Yes,
and
sir.
We are inside a week away from the Rockets starting training camp. So we are approaching my favorite time of the sports calendar, my man.
Hey, I'm going to let this be known right now. If the Tigers and the Astros play against each other, I will probably be wearing all of my Astros shirts out here in Houston. Out here in Detroit. I just want to say it. So, I might turn into public enemy #1 at that time, but it's all good. I'm still representing the H, baby.
Hey, and we wouldn't have it no other way. We wouldn't expect anything less of you, good sir. So we appreciate that.
Yes, sir. But the Houston Texans, man, 3 games into the 2024 campaign. They're currently sitting at 2-1. B. Scott, in the words of CJ Stroud, I'm tired of talking about, Sunday's loss against the Minnesota Vikings. And as I said on Sunday's show, look, we did not have this team going 17-0, 16-0, whatever the case it is now. And we knew that there was going to still be some bumps in the road. However, B. Scott, before we talk about the negatives, what have been some of your top takeaways 3 games into the season when you look at your Houston Texans?
Well, I would say my top takeaway is that the team looks remarkably different when Joe Mixon is out there. I think that that's something that we learned from the first game, and it's only proven itself to be true in the following games when he's either been injured or gotten injured in a game or was unavailable for an entire game in the Minnesota game's case. So Joe Mixon to me is probably their most notable addition on the offensive side of the ball for all of the talk about Stephon Diggs and him being added to the combination of Nico Collins and Tank Dell. There's been a lot. And then, of course, it's a pass-heavy league, quarterback-driven league. So much focus has been on C.J. Stroud in year 2, what that looks like. And then, of course, Stephon Diggs in year 1 with the team. And, of course, C.J. Stroud in year 2 with Nico Collins and Tank Dell. What does all of that look like? And, of course, Bobby Slowick. And you go into all of these different corners and pockets of the conversation before you get to Joe Mixon. And my big takeaway 3 weeks into the season is they need Joe Mixon out there, boy, because he adds a different element, a different dynamic to the team. Now, he's an aging back. He is a seasoned and well-used back, if you would. And so we're seeing already the tread on the tire and how injuries can pile up even early on in the season. But one of my big takeaways is he adds he adds a completely different dynamic to this team. I would also say that on the other side of the ball, and of course we'll get to some of the negatives. These are just kind of bigger picture and probably more so positive takeaways I'm giving you first. But on the other side of the ball, I feel good about the defense, about the Texans' defensive personnel, I should say. Now, not to jump the gun and get too negative. Now, I got some questions about how they're using some of these defensive players, especially how they did so in the Minnesota game to start the game. But overall, top to bottom, and I would even say the front of the depth chart, the first string defense, I would say I feel pretty good about, from the defensive line to the linebackers to the secondary. I think it's a really good defense. I don't know if it's going to be top 3, top 5, top 10 or what, but it's going to be a strong defense. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. And then everything else is to be told, is to unfold throughout the season.
Basically, I want to ask you this question because me and John been talking about this over the past week or so, and I want to get your opinion. You talk about how different this offense looked, without Joe Mixon. And I've been saying for over a week now, every time we talk about Bobby Sloy and how the way he's been calling these games and stuff, and the game plan that he's been using, I've been saying, like, to me, I feel like Bobby Sloy relies too much on the run, and I get it. He comes from the Kyle Shanahan tree, and we all know how much the run is important to that system. However, I don't think nobody who ever has used the Kyle Shanahan tree has had a quarterback like C.J. Stroud. Do you feel that Bobby Sloy relies too much on the run? Because I just take a look at Sunday's game, and I just think to myself, well, matter of fact, the last 2 games, and I think to myself, this offense looks completely different when they cannot establish the run, and I don't understand why, because I'm looking at it from a standpoint, look, I don't want to see C.J. Stroud go out there and throw 70, 80 times, but I just feel like you have the quarterback to the point to where you can utilize his talents even more to get your offense going. To that, you said what?
So I think from a spectator and a fan perspective, from that standpoint, you want to see them sling it all over the park, right? You want to see them throw it around and like, air raid, for lack of a better term. I don't mean the actual air raid system, but as an idea, you want to see them throw the ball however many times, because that's more entertaining. But I respect actual football people who understand the value of running the football, and not just running the football effectively, but what running the football does to the opposing defense, how it imposes physicality, how it forces the defense to tackle, how it forces players to get off blocks. It demands a certain level of physicality, the run game does, that the pass game just simply does not. And it helps you continue to, if you can do it well, it helps you to continue to possess the ball, keeps your defense off the field, keeps the opposing quarterback off the field, which is important, especially if he's a really good quarterback. And the Texans have not actually gotten to the list of really good quarterbacks that they're going to face throughout this season. And even though Sam Darnold performed well and Caleb Williams is probably going to be really good eventually, they have not faced that yet. And so for me, I want them to be able to run the ball for the very reasons that I just mentioned. I want them to be able to possess it and to be able to keep opposing deadly quarterbacks off the field if they can do it. My issue is not with how much they run the ball or their desire to run the ball or any of that. It's really just more so the timing and the feel of it. And I'm not going to pretend to have a better feel for the game than they do, but there are some questions sometimes where you think, like, there's a play where I think C.J. Stroud, instead in the Minnesota game, he doesn't get sacked, but it is for all intents and purposes a sack to me. Like he's got time in the pocket, but nobody's open, and he ends up stepping up just a little bit, and it's a gain of 1. Okay, so it's 2nd and 9, and I'm thinking, you know what, 2nd and 9, let's go ahead and try that again. Let's try to throw the ball again. And Bobby Sloy ran the ball. And I'm like, okay, so maybe is that the decision that you make when a first down play doesn't go the way that you want? You're just going to run the football? And they got a couple of yards. But to me, that was a perfect example of, hey, this is not I know the first down play where you're going to try to pass the ball didn't work out the way that you wanted it to. But I don't know if you run it well enough to be running it on 2nd and 9 at this point, especially with you trailing, which they were from very early. This was not the first drive of the game, right? Because that drive only lasted two plays. So they were trailing basically from set go. I don't feel comfortable with running on 2nd and 9 when you down and CJ Stroud is your quarterback. So it's more of a rhythm, time, and feel of it than it is wanting to do it, being insistent on doing it. I think they should do it. I think they should just have a better feel for it.
On the opposite side of the break, we're going to talk about the negatives with the Houston Texans and what they need to improve upon Sunday when they face against the winless Jacksonville Jaguars.
Texans fans and NFL fans just alike, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So listen, when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play action. You can also get all of that information on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 of bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So visit FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Friday installment of Locked On Texans. Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610, the B Block Podcast, H-Town Hughes, and the Houston Chronicle. Want to say, my brother, congratulations, man. And of course, I'm still following your work, love everything that you do. But as we continue here on this Friday installment of Locked On Texans, B. Scott, we talked about, most of the positives that's going on with the Houston Texans 3 games into the season. Now, let's kind of look at the negatives and what can the Houston Texans do to improve upon their team, especially on Sunday going up against the winless, which is surprising to me, by the way, Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the one positive that we didn't mention, Cody, is that, and this doesn't really have anything to do with it, or doesn't have as much to do with the Texans. I guess they technically did beat the Colts in week 1. But another positive I throw out there before we get to the negatives real quick is that they play in the AFC South.
I want to say to the listeners and viewers, I'm sorry, because I thought the AFC South was going to be one of the best divisions this season.
Guilty.
And my God, was I wrong.
Guilty, man. We was right there together, man. And so I've been hitting on this on the B Block podcast quite a bit as well, is that the Texans need to be glad that they play in the AFC South. They need to be super glad that they play in the AFC South. It is also, though, why I think that this Sunday's game against the Jaguars is all the more important and all the more urgent, because we talk about the difficulty of the schedule, okay? And then we talk about the inferiority of the division. Something's got to give there, right? To me, now this means with the AFC South being worse than we thought it was, but their overall schedule, the Texans that being, their overall schedule still being pretty solid, still about as strong as we thought it was. Yeah. It increases the urgency of performing and specifically winning these division games, especially the ones that are at home. Like, they're in a position now where, like, it's hard to expect them to go undefeated in the division. But I'll be damned if they don't really, if that wouldn't be a great idea. Because where are the cupcakes on the schedule? Where are they at? You could argue that there are none, but the closest thing that you're going to get to it is going to be these AFC South opponents. So I want to point that out as a positive for them. They at least have all of these games against all of these pitiful teams in their own division. They need to take advantage of it. I would say that the negative that needs to be corrected is something that's pretty obvious, and I think it's something that we have all talked about. Everybody that's got, everybody that's got a show or a column or a piece of real estate to go out there and voice their opinion about this team and what's going on.
IG account, TikTok account, Facebook account,
Reddit, whatever, wherever it is you get down. I'm sure you've either made this point or it's been made to you, or you've read it, or you just simply watched the game. They got to stop beating themselves, man. Mm-hmm. They got to stop beating themselves before we can even really start talking about what kind of team they are. Like, before we can talk about them beating the other team, we got to start talking about them, or stop talking about them beating their own team. And I think that's something that they can definitely work on in this game. It's a home game. It's a division opponent, a familiar opponent. And I don't care what they tell you. We all have eyes and have watched the Jaguars play. It's not a very good team. I don't want to call it a get-right game or view it kind of talk about it as if it's kind of like a trap game or anything like that. But to me, there is an enormous opportunity to correct a lot of these issues that they've had, these pre-snap issues that have not just stalled drives, but killed drives, okay? Like you got to get that right. The offensive line, I mean, the highly paid, mostly experienced, and where it's not experienced, it's highly drafted, right? Like every guy on that line is either highly paid or highly drafted, right? So you to me do not have much of an excuse for them being the unit that's holding you back, whether it's them being confused on what to do in pass pro, confused on what to do when the defensive line shifts or when they run stunts, or if it's them not knowing how to line up properly, or if it's them not knowing exactly when to move on the snap count. Like all of it, forget just singling out one of them. All of it needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed quickly and immediately, because like, I mean, we're talking about opportunity here. We're talking about a team with expectations here. It's very much different from the way we talked about them before. And then you look at it, and your most expensive and highly touted unit is giving you this. So I would say the first thing that they can clean up is the penalties. I would say another thing that for the coaches is to really, really look in the mirror and really give a little bit more thought to the matchups. I mean, imagine how I must have felt on Sunday, Cody, when I'm watching the game after the whole week I've been talking about how, yeah, Bobby Slowick, I like the script that he draws. I just could stand to get a little bit more out of his improvisation, like out of his improv game, out of him, adjusting to the moment. And then they go out there and the plan is dog bleep. Like it was like and so it kind of felt like a backhanded compliment last week when I was saying that, right? But then they go out there and didn't even do the one thing that I said they was good at, which was script out a plan and get the team prepared to play. And they didn't look like none of that against Minnesota, out there blocking double-digit sack defensive ends with rookie tight ends and guarding the best wide receiver in football with safeties. And so if they can not do basic stuff like that, or if they can make some elementary adjustments like that, I think that would be a hell of a start.
B. Scott, last question before I let you go, because I know you have some other important things to do. But B. Scott, really quick, when you take a look at Sunday's game, is there anything that concerns you with the Jaguars coming inside NRG Stadium? And can you give me a score prediction as well?
I would say the only thing that concerns me is desperation. And I talk about this not just in football, but just in life. Like, you don't want to be up against, you don't want to be the non-desperate person who's going up against desperation, right? Like if you're going up against desperation, the hope is that you just as desperate and may the best man win, so to speak. But when you're not desperate and your opponent is, that can be scrappy, and that can be a difficult situation. So I think we're going to learn a lot about the Jaguars, and certainly the Jaguars will learn a lot about themselves in terms of how do they respond to the utmost adversity. When you start the season 0-3 the way that they have, get embarrassed on national television on Monday Night Football the way that they did against the Buffalo Bills, and then you go and face an opponent that you actually beat in that same stadium the year before, the team. You got to remember, before C.J. Stroud jumps on the scene and shocks the world last year as a rookie, it was the Jaguars that was supposed to run this division.
Yeah, it was. And it was Trevor Lawrence that was supposed to run this division.
and as they were collapsing last year, it was the Texans that were like changing the outlook. It was the Colts, even with Shane Steichen making things happen with Gardner Minshew. It was them changing the outlook. And all of a sudden, people was talking about the Texans and even the Colts over the Jaguars in terms of who's next or whose division is it going to be. And it's like the Jaguars, man, we hardly knew you. So I would say there's not even really an X's and O's aspect of this because they've just been that bad. I would say it's more of just like a desperation, and how do you respond to desperation? We understand both the teams are coming off of a loss, but one I think is more embarrassing than the other. and obviously one doesn't have a win at all. Okay, so like that to me would be concerning. I would also say the health. Like who's going to be available, and we'll find out more about that throughout the week. But it looks like Tank Dell possibly won't play. It looks like Damian Pierce could be back. But notice the name that I said at the top was Joe Mixon, the one that makes the team look a lot different. And doesn't look like he's probably going to play more than likely, even though he's like day to day or whatever the case may be. So those will be some of the things that would concern me. I'm still expecting the Texans to win. I would be shocked, Cody. I would be shocked if they don't win this game by at least 10 points. I'm gonna go 24-14 Texans on this one, and whatever the score is, I got to be in by 10 points. 24-14 just happened to be the number that came to me, but I think the Texans at least by 10, and it probably should be by more than that.
Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610. Brandon, really quick, where can the listeners follow you at on all your social media platforms? And be sure to tell them about the B Block podcast, H-Town Hoops, because the NBA about to start next week, and any other thing you want to plug in as well.
Man, it's just at Brandon K. Scott on X, formerly known as Twitter, at B Scott from Hiram Clark on Instagram. And as Cody mentioned, we got the B Block podcast rolling for you a couple of times a week. We are also dusting off the H-Town Hoops podcast that specifically focuses on the Houston Rockets. That's with myself and Adam Spillane. But you can get either or both of those, the B Block podcast or the H-Town, or I should say, and the H-Town Hoops podcast, wherever it is that you get your fine podcast.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, it's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. And please be sure to check out my co-host, John Hickman, at John_Hickman12. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.